Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, and welcome to another episode of Capping the Card, where myself and a guest go through every race on a Saturday card and give you our top pick and top value play. It's a great resource for those of you who are looking to handicap and play an entire card. And this Saturday, of course, we're going to be staying up here at the spa and handicapping the Jim Dandy Day card, of course, highlighted by the Jim Dandy Stakes, which has a great rematch of Fierceness and Sierra Leone, sees the gray mixed in, really fun race. We'll get to that, but a lot of other really interesting races on the card. Now, if this is your first time watching NYRA Bets YouTube and capping the card, make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel, where you can get these sorts of full card analyses as well as race previews and educational videos and tutorials on handicapping and betting. Well, I wanted to bring on someone particularly special today, and sometimes these shows are an opportunity for me to meet people that I've not yet met in the horse racing industry that I have so much respect for. And my guest today, listen, you probably know him as the Time Lord. He's the guy who parses over fractions and hand times things when the electronic timers don't work. And that is Mr. Craig Milkowski of Timeform. And Craig, thank you so much for joining me today on Capping the Card.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be here. I'm a little rusty on doing these podcasts, but so yeah, it's kind of good to jump back in and a pleasure to meet you virtually. And hopefully we'll fix that soon and meet in person. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great card, 12 races, and we'll get through all of them here. So let's just get to getting. And race number one is a $100,000 maiden special weight race for 2-year-olds going a mile and a 16th on the inner turf course up here at Saratoga. And these are some of the first 2-year-old races that we've seen just over the last week or so, going 2 turns. So always a little bit of an unknown quantity at this point, even for a 2-year-old race. Craig, you went with a horse that has a little bit of experience in West Beach. Talk to me about your top pick and then your value play at Barricade.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Unfortunately, my PP shut down while I was doing this, but I'm back now.
Oh, all right.
Okay, so yeah, West Beach has a little experience, as you noted. He ran at the Belmont at the Big A meet. And I liked how he ran that day. He ran a decent TimeFormUS speed figure of 86, but it was a race without a whole lot of pace and one that he was a little bit off the pace. And he was able to finish up pretty strongly in that race. I think he's going to benefit from the experience. So in a race loaded with firsters, I think that could help him out a bit here. His last race, the horse in front did go wire to wire, having that pace advantage. So I thought he may have ran even a little bit better than that second place finish looks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly a formidable horse for Brendan Walsh with Tyler Gaffalione aboard. I always like Brendan Walsh horses on the turf. So, and especially when he pairs up with Gaffalione, they're a very formidable duo in that regard. I also went with a horse that has a little bit of experience as my top pick, but not on the grass. And this is a horse number 5, States Rights for Cherie DeVaux with Louis Saez aboard. Saez is in a little bit of a funk up here at Saratoga. Of course, we just saw him win recently in the Haskell with Dornick, so he hasn't forgotten how to ride winners. But just like I said, a little bit of a funk up here, only 2 for 50 at this point in the meet. But this is one I think who will benefit switching over to the turf. The pedigree underneath all points to liking the grass. Cherie DeVaux has been turning out some really live runners this entire meet, winning at a 31% clip. And also her horses have just been running effectively, even when they've not won. They've been hitting the board consistently and doing rather well. This one's had a lot of sharp workouts down at Keeneland. I think maybe second start going long on the turf is going to be beneficial for this one. So, and 6-1 on the morning line. Now your value play, number 10 Barricade, is a little bit more of a price at 8-1 in this spot. What attracted you to this horse?
Well, I mean, the 8-1 and Todd Pletcher and Irad Ortiz, maybe some might look at that as a negative. If this was your typical race at Aqueduct, maybe I would. But at Saratoga, it's easy to slip under the radar a little bit in these spots because there's just so many horses with potential entered in there. So I think this is one that may get left, maybe just slide under the radar. It is Irad Ortiz, so I would be surprised at 8-1. But you also know he's almost always going to give your horse a good trip, particularly particularly on the turf. So I'm not too worried about the 10 post. There were a lot of directions you could have went in this race. I gave some consideration to your 10 horse or to your 5 horse. I gave some consideration to the first time starter. Chad Brown has the 3 horse. But the more I dug in the formulator, I wasn't overly impressed with their stats. So I just kind of went more with Barricade and also my top pick, West Beach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people, in these 2-year-old races, you never really know where the money is going to go sometimes. And a lot of times it does go toward horses that have a little bit of experience, unless there's just a monster pedigree or huge workouts that pop off the page sometimes for people. And you mentioned the 10 post and not being worried. But I think that actually might help the value that you end up getting, because I think some people go, well, the 10 post going long on the turf, maybe I want to avoid this one. But you're right. At Saratoga, even a top fletcher Irad Ortiz Jr. horse can give you a little bit of value. My value play was not quite as big, but it was another 6-1 horse, number 2, Simulate, for Bill Mott and Jose Lezcano. And this is one who has experience as well, actually ran in that West Beach race and was rather one-paced kind of throughout, just kind of sat there and kind of ran mid-pack and kind of towards the back most of the race, didn't really show much. But I thought maybe stretching out is what this horse wants. Going 6 furlongs might not be what this horse does best. And so stretching out for those horses that are a little bit more one-paced, I never thought was a bad idea. You get the inside rail, going to save all the ground, and Kitten's Joy up top in terms of a sire. So I just thought, that might be something a little bit intriguing. I don't necessarily view this one as a win candidate, more as a horse to use potentially underneath in your more vertical exotics. But interesting race to kick it off. And I feel like a lot of interesting options and directions you could go in this one. So should be fun. Get things started in the early pick 5. And race number 2, we'll go to that one now. $90,000 maiden special weight for New York breds that are 3-year-olds and up, going 7 furlongs on the dirt. We both landed on the same top pick in this race, which is the number 5 Time Bar at 3-1. And this is a horse that, ran, I thought, pretty well in debut, kind of made a move, got pretty close to the pace, and then faded a little bit late. Was also off kind of just maybe a half step slow out of the gate initially. And I think will benefit from that second start. This is another Bill Mott horse with Junior Alvarado aboard, and has been working out spectacularly since coming out of that maiden race, sired by Arrogate. But I do think the benefit will benefit from cutting back just a little bit there. What attracted you to the same horse as your top pick in this race?
Yeah, the workouts were part of it for sure, but I went and watched that replay as well, and it was a pretty ugly break. The trip note just says bump break in the chart, but the horse was inside and noticeably got shuffled. I like the turn of speed he had to get into contention, was kind of wide around the turn, and I just think this one has some room to improve off of that effort. A couple of the others that I've talked about in here, not so much. Even the horse I made my value play, Sorority Park, he's a horse who's run several times. If he was a shorter price, I would be very leery of him. He's been in front with a furlong to go on at least a couple occasions and wasn't able to get the job done. But he will offer a little more price, so that's why he was my value play, as opposed to a horse like Ironman Ira, who's also run 4 times in his career. But he's also blown leads, but he's a shorter price. So he's the kind of horse I really look to bet against.
Yeah, absolutely. The Ironman Ira, I was also looking to play against this one for Rick Dutrow Jr., Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard, as we just mentioned, probably going to attract even more money from that 9 to 5 morning line. And yeah, you start getting into 0 to 4 territory, and you start wondering, and this horse has lost as the favorite before and as a horse that's attracted some money. And you're right, gives up that lead late occasionally. So also Rick Dutrow Jr. not off to a great start, limited sample size at Saratoga. None of his horses have even hit the board yet. So something to just make note of. My value play, I went to a horse, and I agree with you that I think that there's not a ton of value necessarily in this race when you get by both of our top picks. But I went to the number 2 Executive Move, and this is more of just a hunch play than anything else for Charlton Baker. This is a horse coming off a significant layoff, actually ran against your value play sorority prank back in December. That was this horse's debut. And that was a useful race. Doc Sullivan was the winner of that race, came out and obviously went on to win a New York bred stakes race later on. And Allied Attack was the next out winner as well. You had another horse, Lil Lang, who went on to win and has now actually won again on the turf. So that was a nice race. But this horse, Executive Move, has not been seen since that December race. But you get Lasix for the first time, recent gelding, and Baker has been really training this horse up. You see a 6 furlong workout in there, so building up that foundation, a couple of 5 furlong works. I just thought, 10-1, maybe this is a little bit of a wild card play just to see how this horse runs off the bench. Maybe there's been some improvement from the age of 2 to 3, and thought it was just kind of worth a little bit of a shot there. And again, more of an underneath consideration in my eyes for this one, but should be, like I said, 2 fun maiden races to kick things off on the card. Well, let's move to race number 3, $25,000 claimer for 4-year-olds and up. Again, going 7 furlongs on the dirt, and you went to the coupled entry there with your top pick, the 1 Market Alert and the 1A Amundsen, 3-1 on the morning line. What attracted you to that pair?
This is one the TimeFormUS pace projector sees this race as having a really fast pace, and I don't disagree. Now, it's something I'll monitor the scratches because that could always change, and it does update in real time. But the way the race sets up now, 2 of the most likely horses that come from off the pace are the 2 entry mates. I'm not one that likes to bet entries, and I'd actually prefer it if one of them scratched, and I would just play the other one and probably get better value. I don't know if they're both going to run. They have different riders' names, so I guess they probably are, but they do offer a pretty strong hand in this spot.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, certainly you look at a lot of different metrics, they make a lot of sense. And, in terms of the class that they've been keeping, the speed figures that they've been running, just the overall performances and form that they've been showing, definitely a formidable duo there. And I think you probably will end up seeing both. And that'll be interesting to see what happens with the value and the betting in this particular race. I went to a horse, number 7, Master of Arms, as my top pick at 9-2 on the morning line. And this is a horse for John Ortiz, who we actually just saw earlier today. We're recording this just for the folks listening at home on a Thursday. We just saw John Ortiz pick up his first win at Saratoga earlier in the day. This is one taking a little bit of a class drop, has been running against Starter Allowance Company at Oak Lawn and Churchill. And again, does tend to do his best work on the lead, but the last couple of times has been sitting a little further back, sitting that tracking trip, mid-pack trip. Now, again, is a little one-paced. I do worry about that, but you mentioned potentially a hot pace. If this one's sitting 3rd or 4th, like he has the last couple of times out, could kind of inherit a little bit of a lead if some of the leaders fall back to him. So I thought at 9-2 presented a little bit of value and intrigue in this particular race. You went to a horse, Perfect Flight, for 8-1 for your value play. What things were you looking at in this one that you liked in particular?
Mostly it was because of the pace. Like I said, I do expect a hot pace. He's turning back from longer races, some 1 turn, some 2 turn. His last trip, I think it's worth watching. It was kind of just a disastrous trip, and I would just put a line through that race. And if we get the pot pace that I expect here, I expect a pretty strong late kick from this guy on the turn back to the 7 furlongs. I'm not a huge turn back guy unless the pace is going to be fast, but when there are turnbacks, I really like them to be 7 furlongs and not 6 or 6.5.
I could not agree more with that. That is a great kind of bit for people to hold on to, I think, and a great nugget, because I do find the dynamic in 6 and 6.5s are a little bit different than at 7. And I agree with you. Those turnbacks from routes to 7 furlongs usually hits those horses between the eyes a little bit better than going even shorter. Just the race complexion changes the shorter you get there. So completely agree. There was a race a couple of months ago. I remember there was a horse going from 1 1/8 to 5.5 furlongs. That was the first toss I made looking at that race. That is too much of a turn back there. My value play is number 10, Flint Ridge, 12-1 for Gustavo Rodriguez. This one also has been running against, maybe a little bit better competition, has been running against kind of claiming 40, claiming 32, dropping slightly in class now. Again, a little bit like my 7 in that the horse has has done some good work up on the lead, but has recently been sitting and showing the ability to sit a little bit more past some horses that raced 3 back at Aqueduct. You see the horse made up some ground late. Even last time out, the horse made up some ground as well and improved throughout the race. So again, if there's a little bit of speed in this one, this is a horse that might have the ability to come running a little bit late. And at 12-1, I thought was a pretty significant price and something to think about including, again, more in your verticals for this particular race. Well, let's head to race number 4, $110,000 allowance for 3-year-olds and up, going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And we both have the same top pick in this race. And this is a horse that, Craig, is really interesting because this is one that was very ballyhooed right after that maiden victory. And that is, of course, the number 5 Speak Easy for Todd Pletcher. This horse was pointed towards the Fountain of Youth as the next race. And people remember that race was just completely obliterated with scratches. You had another horse, Victory Avenue, that was supposed to run in that race who scratched. Locked was supposed to run in that race and scratched. And, Dornick ended up inheriting that victory in a lot of ways. And quite frankly, I can't speak for you, but I'll just say I kind of held that against him, maybe to my detriment, because I didn't think there was much that he beat in that race. And then he didn't run well in the Bluegrass or the Kentucky Derby. And then all he's done is won the Belmont and Haskell since then. So interesting kind of sliding doors with what's happened with Speakeasy, who has gone to the bench for a little while, now has come back, massive speed figure in debut. And beat the aforementioned Victory Avenue, who was also very well thought of horse coming out of that race. Was it just as, I'm curious because we talked about this a little offline in terms of top picks, maybe not always presenting value. Is this a type of horse where you use this horse as a single in an early pick 5 sequence? Is this one where you have that much confidence in this horse, or coming back from the layoff, are you still looking to potentially play against him?
He's not a horse that I would want to play too heavily against. If I was playing a pick 5, I'd probably use my value horse a little bit as like a backup in here. But I think Speakeasy's race was legit. There's a little bit of concern about the layoff, but it's Todd Pletcher. He brings these horses back, puts them in spots they can win. And I think that first race was legitimate. It's not a race that we saw a crazy amount of winners coming out of, but all the horses were running back to or running better speed figures. So I think that number is totally legit. There was a horse well back in the field batting down that day who we're going to talk about later on in the feature race. So I think it was a good quality field. He beat that field pretty easily. And I think he is clearly the horse to beat. So yeah, if I was playing verticals, he would be like an A on my pick 5. I mean, if horizontals, he would be an A on my pick 5.
It's interesting. You went to a really big price as your value play, the number 8 Edified. And this is something that I don't know if you do it, I do it sometimes, is when you have a really big favorite, I love finding a big long shot and pairing them up in just a straight up exacta sometimes. I used to do this with Happy Saver a lot of times because he would always end up running against these, big monsters, and he would be 10 or 12-1, and I would just kind of do a Life is Good Happy Saver exacta. But you have a 15-1 horse here, Edified, as your value play. And I'll be honest, when you sent this over, I really took a second look at this horse. There's some things to like here.
Yeah, and I also like when the horse has a different running style than the favorite. Now, we can't say that Speakeasy for sure is a front runner. He's only run one time, but we know he has good tactical speed, whereas Edified will come from off the pace. He's not a need the lead type. And I actually like this return race quite a bit. He took a big jump up in his TimeFormUS speed figure in a race that did not feature a lot of pace at all. All the fractions are coded blue as slow in TimeFormUS, but he ran much a career best, just way better than he ever had before, a 99 overall figure. So he's one that I think is probably sitting on a big race. And when I look through the rest of the field, it was just a lot of the same horses I've seen before, nothing to get too excited about. He's the one that I think has some real improvement in him.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to get a huge price on him too. And Speakeasy is a horse that is likely going to take even more money from even money. And so if that's the case, suddenly the board, everybody starts floating up and you can really start getting some wonky prices at that point, and some things you can attack vertically. My value play may not end up for John Kimmel. And this is a horse with Kendrick Carmouche aboard Second start off of a significant layoff, had not run from November until June, comes back and runs in a first level allowance race, or an N1X race, I should say, runs against Jefferson Street, who we're going to see on Friday in the Amsterdam Stakes and is the overwhelming favorite in that race here up at Saratoga, and just faded late. Again, pretty strong fractions in that race early on, going 21 and change, 44 and change to the quarter and a half. And again, second start off the layoff. This horse has some speed figures going back to last year that would certainly make him at least competitive, I think, with some of the other horses in this race, maybe outside of Speakeasy. So one to maybe consider an exacta. Again, like you, I think Speakeasy looks pretty formidable in this spot, probably going to be a single in the early pick five sequence if you're playing. Let's head to race number 5, which is a $50,000 starter allowance for 3-year-old and up, going 1 1/8 miles on the dirt. And again, we landed on the same horse, but I will tell people we are going to start varying quite a bit moving forward. But you ended up on Who's the King, 5-2. So did I. Talk to me a little bit about this one, Craig.
He's just a horse to me. He took a big jump up last time in his TimeFormUS speed figure. He showed some pretty good speed that day. The reason I put him on top here is there is just not very much speed in this race at all, looking at the TimeFormUS pace projector. He's shown he can run well at the distance of 1 1/8 miles. And I just think being all alone on the front end, which is how it looks like it's going to play out, he's going to be very tough to run down.
Yeah, I agree with you. That was largely where I was looking as well. When looking at the pace scenario in particular, I always use the formulator pace projector as a handicapping tool. And it really, like you said, very little pace here, and the 4 kind of sat alone up top. I'll also say Saffie Joseph Jr. has been turning out some really good horses up here at Saratoga. We just saw him win the other day and get a win with Mike Smith aboard with Spirit Wind, upsetting Money's Gold. And so that's something to keep in mind in the honorable miss. So he's been turning out some live runners up here, and looks like another one here with the number 4. My value play kind of tries to follow some of your logic, and that's the number 1 horse, Have You Heard, from Mike Maker with Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard. This horse, I don't know. This horse has some tactical speed to be sitting maybe 3rd or 4th in the early going. This horse isn't going to come from that far back. And with the lack of speed in this race, Irad could get this horse out sitting 2nd or 3rd. And in that case, the horse is at least in a position to maybe make a run and maybe take a crack at the leaders coming for home, going to be able to save ground from that inside rail. You went to the far outside with yours, number 10, Game Warden, at 7-2. What attracted you to this horse?
I'll be honest, if I had it to do over again, I might have landed on your horse. I kind of overlooked how good he's been since the claim, particularly on dirt. But Game Warden's kind of the same thing. Normally, the outside post, I would worry about at 1 1/8 miles in Saratoga. That first turn comes up pretty quick. But when there's no real speed in the race, it doesn't look like it's going to be a huge issue to get position. And this is a guy that just has speed figures that really fit in this race. 7-2 might be a stretch for value, but I'm not so convinced that the 4 is just going to love things all alone by himself, that if I were playing this race, I might actually lean towards Game Warden, or even a horse like you said, Have You Heard. I think Where's the King is probably the most likely winner, but at the end of the day, I don't know that he's going to offer any value. So I kind of like others in here at the betting window.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you make about kind of looking at where the line moves as well, getting closer to post time. And if Who's the King is getting bet down to below 2-1 or something like that, then I think you have to start looking at where there's other better value elsewhere on the board. And, one of the things that you brought up as well is sometimes when you have a horse coming into a race where there's no speed up front, and a horse maybe is traditionally more of a stalker, a presser, a tracker, they might not like actually being up in the lead. They might like having a little bit of a target to run at. And so while we might look at it on the screen and go, well, they have a tactical advantage, the horse might not like that tactical advantage. So always something to consider when you're thinking about, horse potentially getting, alone on the lead, et cetera. So good points there regarding value as well. So let's head to our first of the 2 stakes races on the card, which is the Alfred G. Vanderbilt Handicap, Grade 1, going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And I'm going to zig a little bit here. I'm going to try to find a little bit of value in this particular race. Listen, Skelly makes a lot of sense in this race. Your top pick, who I'm going to let you talk about here in a little bit. I ultimately went to Subrogate, a horse that I've just really liked since he came back, and quite frankly has not done anything wrong sprinting at all. He does have some questions to answer with regards to Lasix, but we've seen him run off Lasix and run well. He broke his maiden off of Lasix, ran fourth in the Pegasus Stakes off Lasix, and and so we've seen him do that at least successfully in one instance. He's come back from that pretty long layoff from July 23 to April 24. He's been undefeated since he came back and ran an absolute monster race last time out, running a 106 Beyer speed figure, and has Irad Ortiz Jr. up on the mount. The horse has the ability to rate a little bit behind the speed, depending on how things shake out at the break. And we'll obviously, this is a big class test, but I think at 7-2 in a relatively short field is at least an interesting horse to take a look at. He was your value play, but I'll let you talk a little bit about Skelly, who, is a very, very impressive horse. And just all he does is wins, it feels like.
Yeah, and now to be clear to the people listening, when I put my top pick, that's the horse I think's most likely to win. I will say there is zero chance I would bet a horse like Skelly. And I actually think there's some real negatives with Skelly. He's had some serious issues getting out of the gate since he returned from Saudi Arabia, when he ran a really good second in that sprint race there. He won a couple of those races at Oaklawn, but that was against weaker competition. Last time he faced a really good horse that's in top form and closed the game Sugar, and that slow start really cost him. And I think this is a pretty tough field as well, even tougher than that win. And I worry. Yes, I think he's the most likely winner because there's not a ton of speed in here. If he only breaks a little bit slowly, then maybe I'd think he's just going to be faster than these guys. But this is a horse that used to be a rocket ship out of the gate. I mean, he'd be 3 in front before you went 200 yards, and he's not the same. So if I was betting this race, the two horses I'd be looking to are Subrogate, who I picked as my value play, and also Baby Yoda, a horse that I absolutely loved. I think that was on Belmont weekend when it was at Saratoga, because he had run a huge race on the Belmont at the Big A meet on the TimeFormUS speed figures, and he came back and matched that in the True North. So either one of those two for me would be the ones that I would be betting on. Just it kind of depends on the odds. They're both 7-2 on the morning line. If there's not much separation, I could even bet them both. It's just one of those cases where I do not trust Skelly, even though he's the horse I think is most likely to win.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And I think that, first of all, I think I was contractually obligated to mention Baby Yoda. My dad is the biggest Baby Yoda fan, and so I had to make sure I worked him into this video somehow. And I'm not necessarily a proponent of horse for course, but it does seem like this horse loves Saratoga. And Baby Yoda just runs his best races sometimes up here at the spa. That's where he kind of exploded a few years ago onto the scene for Bill Mott. And Mott has done a good job getting him back into top form, because it really looked like he had fallen off there for a little while. And he's really done a great job getting him back into top form. And, one of the things that I'll say about the way Mott has largely managed this horse is every time he's had a setback, Mott usually finds a new spot for him to run in to build his confidence back up. And I always like that. It just speaks to the sort of trainer that Bill Mott is. You see Chad Brown do this with horses a lot as well. When they have a setback, okay, let's drop back a little bit, get you a win, get confidence back up before we try at a tougher spot again. And Baby Yoda's on a little bit of a roll now. You mentioned that huge race during Belmont at Aqueduct, and then follows it up with that True North, just absolutely blitzing a field in the True North. They're winning by 6 lengths and drawing off. So, those are the two that I'm looking at. I should just mention, just because he's 5-2 on the morning line, a horse like Nakatomi, the number 1 horse, another very formidable horse, but is a horse that does have a tendency not to win. Does have a tendency to kind of finish second and third a lot, and at a relatively short price, I'm going to kind of try to avoid that one. And like you said, maybe go to the 4 and the 5 for a little bit of value.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up, because I wanted to sneak it in there. I have no idea how this horse gets bet so heavily almost every time out. I can never figure it out. And he always seems to run just okay, just enough to keep people betting him. He runs the same kind of speed figures every time. They're not really good enough to win at this class, but I guess he teases people just enough that they think next time is the time. I've probably put him right in the winner's circle now on Saturday, but I will continue to bet against him. He's one of those, sometimes I'm stubborn and it costs me, but it hasn't really cost me with him yet.
Leslie Ward needs to send you a thank you note or something. So, it's you're right though. He is a type that he shows you just enough to think maybe next time's the time. He always runs honest. I have to say that about him, but he just never gets over the hump. And I agree, at a short price, he's a bet against for me. Let's go to race number 7 on the card, and this is a $100,000 maiden special weight for 2-year-olds going 6.5 furlongs on the dirt, and call me sentimental with my top pick. I went with Invictus, number 1 horse for Brad Cox. Why did I do this? Well, it's the first foal out of Serengeti Empress. This is sure to attract a lot of attention, in addition to Brad Cox being a trainer who knows how to get them ready first time out, obviously. Horse has been training well, love the gate work, 3 back, really 5 furlong work as well, building in some foundation here. A lot to like with this one. Is obviously going to get bet down pretty significantly in this race. I usually don't like taking too short of a price in a 2-year-old race unless there is just some monster pedigree, huge kind of workouts that you just have been hearing all the buzz about. But this one certainly looks pretty good. Sired by Into Mischief, sold for $1.2 million at the Keeneland September sales last year. So clearly some expectations. But listen, you went and you threw Thomas at 20-1. Talk to me a little bit about this one.
It's just like you said, these are the kind of races I don't really like taking a short price in, especially at Saratoga. I mean, at other meets, these horses probably kind of win at a higher percentage than you're going to see at these bigger boutique meets. But these are the races I've seen where there's probably 6 or 7 horses that could win in here. You just don't know how good they are. And I figured I'd take a shot with a horse who has great breeding in here by Justify out of a Tappet mare. I know Wayne Lucas's stats look pretty bad, but it's not like he never wins with first-time starters. And if he's going to do it, it's probably going to be at a meet like Saratoga. So I just took a flyer. I don't really like trying to guess among what short price horses are going to beat each other. So it's one where it's just kind of going against the grain and hoping to get a little bit lucky, because these races are kind of a crapshoot for me.
They can be, but one of the more reliable people in that crapshoot is Chad Brown, who is the trainer of your number 4, Chancer McPatrick, sired by McKenzie. I feel like McKenzie, he's not produced a winner yet, but I feel like he's gotten a little unlucky. He's had 5 second-place finishes, if I'm not mistaken, out of this first crop of his, out of like 10 or 11 starts. So his offspring are running. They're just not quite getting there to win, like the Vacomas and the complexities that we've seen in this 2-year-old crop. But this one at 4-1, talk to me a little bit about this one that you circle as your value play.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe McKenzie could break through here. I really liked his last workout. I don't remember if it was a bullet. I know there were a whole bunch of horses that worked, and he was the second fastest that day. And watching it, he looked pretty good. It's gotten good workout reports. So he seemed just like a logical horse in here that I expect to run well.
Yeah, absolutely. He was 3rd of 138. So that is quite a workout for a 2-year-old to be that effective at a 4 furlong work. I went to the far outside, and I usually don't like doing that in particular for 2-year-old races, because young horses tend to break out towards open territory and open ground. And I always worry about drawing that far outside post and a horse just giving up 3 or 4 lengths right at the break and breaking out. But I am intrigued by Tiz-tastic. Sired by Tiz the Law, out of a Tappet mare, who has produced some nice runners, as well as Interpolate, who was a stakes winner. So this one has some good pedigree in the background. And, Steve Asmussen doesn't bring a lot of horses up here, but, he always tends to have a couple of good maidens every meet up here at Saratoga. 6-1. Again, we'll see how the board shakes out these 2-year-old races. Sometimes, long shots can become betting line favorites, and betting line favorites can start floating up. And, our mutual friend, David Aragona, who does the morning line up here, it's a tough morning line to set in these 2-year-old spots. So we'll have to see. And I would encourage anybody playing this race, just pay attention to where the board is going and, make some decisions based upon that leading up to this particular race.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment. You said about the 10 horse.
Yeah.
You talked about young horses who like to break out. As a guy who's probably timed a million races and I always see the head-on replays, that's a problem for a lot of horses. You can watch tons of races, and the outside post, it sounds good a lot of times, but when you get out there in the 8, 9, 10, and even wider sometimes, it can be a real detriment. So I'm kind of glad you brought that up. I just see it time and time again where the outside post just breaks out, and probably it doesn't look like it on the pan shot, but they're definitely costing themselves some lengths as they have to get straightened out to get their run going. So just something to keep an eye on when you watch races and you're making trip notes. If the horse breaks, great, it's a good trip, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the importance of watching a head-on shot too, because sometimes if you're watching that fan shot, you don't really notice it. And sometimes the horse is pretty quick and is kind of with everybody else early, but you don't realize because you lack the depth to see the horse has actually given up a huge amount of ground and would have been up front if the horse had just broken straight. That's a really good point. And it was something, if you're watching replays, always watch those head-ons. Whenever there's a trip note, I always try to make a point to watch the head-ons there as well. So let's move on to another maiden special weight race on the card. Race number 8, $100,000 maiden special for 3-year-old nut fillies and mares, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf. I'm going with a little kind of zigging a little bit in this race, taking a little bit of a shot with the number 3 Mac to More. Again, a John Ortiz horse with Ramon Vasquez aboard this time, getting back on the turf. And this is a horse that debuted down at Gulfstream Park on the turf, and I thought ran a pretty good race down there. Went up against a horse that won next time out, actually in a race that featured Mac to More as well, but that was on the Tapeta down there in South Florida. And that next race actually produced a couple of other next out winners. This horse has faced some decent competition, then went to the bench from March until July, came back and went a mile at Ellis Park over a sloppy track, or a muddy track, I should say, in a race that was taken off the turf and faded late, as you might expect, going a mile. Now John shortens the horse back up to 5.5, where I think he's probably most effective, gets back on the turf. I thought a 12-1, maybe a little bit of a value play / my top pick, but a horse that I'm definitely going to be interested in using in this one. Your kind of most likely winner in this race is the Wesley Ward horse. Wesley Ward turf sprints, those two things go hand in hand. Scarlet Poppy certainly looks formidable here.
Yeah, she's got the best speed figures for sure on TimeFormUS. What's interesting about this horse is he started her out in the route, which isn't something you usually see. She didn't start till she was a 3-year-old. She turned back to a sprint, and she's run fine both times. I'll be honest, she's not the kind of horse that I'm going to bet, but I won't be surprised if she wins at 3-2 or 8-5, something like that. She's got a good shot, but she's not the kind of horse that I'm going to bet in here. I would much prefer my value play. Chad Brown's Arisu, I think is how you say that. A full confession, I didn't listen to last year's replays. I just watched them. It's a horse that Chad Brown's obviously wanted to get on the turf. He's run her twice, both times last year. Both times they were rained out, as everybody remembers. We had a ton of rain at Saratoga last year, but she's actually ran just fine in those spots, and it looks like she's probably going to get to finally run on the turf, and I think she's going to be fine. It's what Chad's wanted all along. He gets Irad Ortiz again, and I just think she's really strong in this spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those running lines really popped off the page when you see a horse that still, is intended for the turf both times, obviously trained by Chad as well, his resume on the turf. And, that's, I would say, a very important handicapping note. There was a horse actually up here, I want to say last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, during opening week, that they had been trying to get on the turf for a while. It wasn't Chad's barn. It might have been, I forget whose barn. I don't want to misspeak, but they've been trying to get the horse on turf for a while. They finally get the horse on turf, and I mean, the horse runs a hole in the wind as a maiden, and it's like, yep, that's exactly what they thought was going to happen now the whole time. So, paying attention to that sort of stuff is so important to see. And like you said, the horse has shown talent on the dirt as well. It's not like there were bad races by any stretch in those spots. My value play, again, I'm going to go with a little bit of a long shot here and just maybe a horse to consider thinking about and if you're playing vertically in this spot. But that's number 2 tipple for Linda Rice. Now, Linda Rice, when I think about first-time starters, is not usually synonymous. I usually think about Linda on the claim and, running in those starter allowance races, optional claimers up here and getting a lot of winners doing that. But this is one whose pedigree really screams turf underneath. And she's been working this one out with some serious bullet works coming in. Now, has not been facing a huge amount of company in the mornings, but has still been turning out some really nice 5 furlong works leading up to debut. And I like seeing those fast gate works as well for a young horse, knowing that this horse can get out of the gate effectively, get up to speed quickly, is not going to get shuffled too far back. So one to think about at 12-1. Again, the connections that may not take a ton of money in a maiden race as opposed to some other different types of races. Let's move to race number 9 on the card, $80,000 optional claimer for 3-year-olds going 1 mile and a 16th on the inner turf. We both like a horse in this race, but I'm going to let you talk about your top pick, Maine Beach at 5-1. The number 2 horse, what caught your eye with this runner?
This horse ran a huge speed figure at Monmouth Park last time, and I just wonder if maybe the horse will get overlooked, and David's morning line seems to point in that direction a little bit, as I think he's third choice on the morning line. But that 112 TimeFormUS number just makes him the best in this field. And maybe I'd worry a little bit if it were a different trainer shipping a horse in from Monmouth, but I've just seen this so often from Chad Brown, where he'll take horses to Tampa and then run them back at Gulfstream or at Keeneland, or he does it at, Monmouth. He uses frequently in the summer. And it's just the fact that he has so many horses that he needs to find spots for them. So just because he takes a horse to Monmouth doesn't mean that he thinks it's a slower horse. It's just a horse who he found a good spot for. And I thought this horse ran really well. If you look at the race in TimeFormUS PPs, he was on the lead. He was setting a slow pace and he won easy. Normally, I would view that as kind of a negative, but he's a horse in his prior start at Monmouth had kind of a nightmare trip off the pace, had ran a pretty good speed figure even that day. So he's shown me some versatility, and I think a repeat of that effort makes him really dangerous in here. I don't expect him to be on the lead last time, but I do expect him to get a really good ground-saving trip.
Yeah, I love to see the versatility of horses, throughout their previous starts. I always, tell people I always like to see a horse that has a plan B. When plan A doesn't work, do they have a backup plan? And do they know how to win coming from off the pace? Or if things don't break the right, do they know how to win on the rail, win going wide, et cetera? So always good to see that sort of versatility in a horse. My topic was right next door, the Wesley Ward horse who, was coming over from the Aidan O'Brien barn, actually, and ran in the UAE Derby earlier this year, excuse me, and ran 5th in that race, well behind Forever Young and Pandagate, and had been on the turf, though, leading up to that, and was largely running on very saturated turf, we should say, but been running over in Ireland and France over yielding, heavy, and soft ground. So we'll see how the horse likes firmer turf over here. Has been working out on the turf up here at Saratoga for Wesley, sired by Dabawi. Gets Frankie Dettori aboard. This is a horse that was trying to make its North American debut in the Canterbury Derby, but that was taken off the turf. So now we're going back to the turf now, finally getting back on the grass for this one. And I thought 5-1. We'll see if we end up getting this price. And, because again, Wesley Ward on the turf, people like betting this one.
Yeah, and he was a horse that was thought of pretty highly. I mean, he ran into Group 1 in his last start as a 2-year-old, had some decent time form ratings there, and just hasn't really got a chance to show his stuff since then. Running on synthetic, tried the dirt in the UAE Derby, then off the turf in that small stakes at Canterbury where I thought he ran just fine. And now he shows up at Saratoga. So maybe his form's dirtied up just enough. I wish David had made this horse more like 8-1 on the morning line. Maybe people wouldn't have noticed, but I think this horse is going to run a lot better than those morning lines look. Than those running lines. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I was like finding the muddied running lines, and yeah, I have to talk to David about that. Try to, let's try to hide some of these horses every once in a while. But I'll just talk briefly about my value play. I should say the number 4 Time Song at 10-1 for George Weaver. Listen, Weaver is a trainer who last year had a lot of success up here on the turf, and this one is getting back into his barn. A horse that broke its maiden at Gulfstream Park and then was immediately stepped up to stakes competition. Wasn't really up to that level. I thought ran a perfectly fine race last time out. Made up a little bit of ground late before kind of flattening out towards the end. And I just think that 10-1, this one presents maybe a little bit of value for a barn that I do know has the ability to have some success up here on the turf. And we'll see. Like I said, I really like the 2 and the 3 quite a bit in this race. So the 4 is kind of more of a horse to consider underneath in these different spots, but should be a really fun race, I think, and exciting to see it, particularly if one of those 2 horses that we talked about really pops and jumps out, then it's exciting to see what might be next for them. Well, let's head to the feature race of the day, which is the Jim Dandy Grade 2 for 3-year-olds. These are the horses that we have seen on the Kentucky Derby, Preakness, the Belmont Stakes. We've seen them on the Triple Crown Trail, but some new phases as well. And this is one where when I sat down and I ended up landing on Fierceness as my top pick, I really didn't like myself much, Craig. And I sat there and I thought to myself, I don't really trust. I don't know. A, I don't know how I landed on this top pick. And B, I'm not sure I really trust myself that much with this one. But listen, he is a horse that is supremely talented when he gets things his own way and when he is able to run his best race. Using just about any metric, his best is quite simply better than everybody else in his crop. And the question is, though, are you going to see his best? It is very much so an on-off, on-off, on-off cycle that he has shown throughout his career. Now, if you believe it is as simple as that, then this race is supposed to be a good one because his last one in the Kentucky Derby was a bad one. I don't think it's usually as simple as that. There are usually some other mitigating circumstances that lead to horses not running well in different spots. But he's very effective. Johnny Velasquez, I think, draws well to the outside in this particular race. I do think there's a fair amount of speed in this race, certainly with Seize the Gray batting down and John Sadler's horse, Pony Express. But Johnny can have this horse kind of sitting in a tracking trip, might be hung wide. We'll have to see how things go into that first turn. But, it's so interesting because I was kind of torn between him and Sierra Leone. And really, they're a tale of 2 different horses. One is incredibly consistent, but could just come up just short, and sometimes it's his own worst enemy. And the other is brilliant, but inconsistent. So you went with the more consistent runner here as your top pick, Sierra Leone, who really has never run a bad race. Talk a little bit about this horse.
Yeah, it came down for me. I just don't trust Fierceness. I don't think it's as simple as every other race. I have no argument with you as a speed figure maker. I mean, he's the fastest horse. He's ran faster as a 2-year-old than any of these, and his Florida Derby was faster than we've seen for many of these. But in those races, everything just went perfectly. And he does at least have the benefit of drawing the outside post. So maybe he can get a perfect trip in here as well. But that's just never something I want to bank on because, as you said, there is some real speed in here. Seize the Gray obviously won the Preakness over a muddy track. But if you look at his PPs in TimeFormUS, they are just littered with red fractions. It's not only is he on the lead or close to the lead, they're going really fast when doing it. And batting down's a horse who's just been running like his tail was on fire the last couple races and kind of blowing the competition away. So it's hard to imagine a situation where Junior Alvarado is not going to try to get to the front with that guy. I mean, he's just been clear by a mile both times out. So it's just, for me, I can't see a more perfect setup for Sierra Leone. You could say he had a perfect setup in the Derby, but that's a 20-horse field. I don't know if you ever get a perfect setup. And The other times he's had a fast pace, he mostly gets the job done or runs really well. The Belmont, I thought he ran just fine. It's just Dornoch was a little bit too good that day. And for me, I just went with Sierra Leone because I think he's going to get that pace set up. Now, he's even money on the morning line. Highly unlikely that I'm going to bet him. So as my value play, I went with Gould's Gold, a horse who can also come from off the pace, but being a little more close than Sierra Leone would be. He's shown speed to track. He chased Batten down around the track last time, but I think that was mostly by necessity because nobody else was up there. He's a horse who I think can sit mid-pack and run just fine. He's getting better every time out. His speed figures keep improving. So he's actually a horse I may have a few bucks on in this race and use him in exacta wheels with Sierra Leone and maybe even a horse like Batten Down.
Yeah, I really agree with you about Gould's Gold. If you go to NYRA Bets and read my analysis, he was one of the horses I highlighted in this race. Really like him a lot in this spot. And I'm glad you brought up Batten Down running fast for no reason at all, because I remember watching the Ohio Derby and thinking to myself, you don't need to go this fast. Like, you could slow down and still be comfortably in the lead. Like, what's Junior doing? But Junior knew what he was doing. He's letting this horse just go out and run. And obviously a horse that has very good bloodlines, being the full sibling Tacitus, being the full sibling to a very impressive filly Scylla, who's also trained by Belmont, who's a multiple graded stakes winner now. And he's my value play in this race. We'll see the sort of trip he carves out, whether he presses, sees the gray, whether sees the gray presses him, kind of how that early pace scenario works out. I think he can pass horses. I think he doesn't need to necessarily be on the lead, though he has in both of his victories. And we'll just have to wait and see. But I thought those top two, I think, are just going to take so much money that I think everybody else is just going to kind of be in a little bit of a different price. And I think Batten Down is a horse that could very well float up from that 5-1 morning line. As, like I said, I think Fierceness and Sierra Leone, the public is just going to be drawn to those two because they are the huge names in this particular race, and should be a real I was going to say a real dandy, but that's a little too much of a dad joke. So but it should be a really, really good race. Looking forward to this one on Saturday. Well, after the Jim Dandy, there's still two more races on the card, and this is something my friends in horse racing don't always understand. They always go, wait, we just had like the equivalent of the Super Bowl, and now we still have two more races after this? Yes, that's the way we do things in horse racing. So we go from that to a $95,000 allowance for 3-year-old New York breds, going 1 mile and a 16th on the turf. And I was talking to you about this ahead of time. I said, yes, your top pick can also be your value play. And this was the race where you just doubled up on the number 4 Gem Mint 10 at 6-1. So what drew you to this runner?
Mostly it's just the speed figures and the pace projector in TimeFormUS. It's not a race with a lot of speed. He's shown second on the pace projector behind Willing to Risk It All. And I'd be fine with that in here because like you talked about before, I don't know if he's a horse that wants to be on the lead. He's been in that spot a few times and hasn't got the job done, but I like when they're in a tracking position, maybe sitting on the rail behind 1 or 2 horses. And I just think he's a horse that really fits in this field. Speed figure wise, he looks good. He gets that good inside post. You mentioned that Luis Saez has been really cold of late at Saratoga, but I think this is the kind of horse that is right up his alley. And I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, this is a guy, if memory serves, he's won the riding title a couple times, if I remember right. So I think he's going to get it going. As you said, he's won out of town, won some big races. And this just seems like it's just a horse I really like. So I didn't want to venture too far away. He's going to be a price, and he's the one I'll be keying in this race.
Yeah, absolutely. A horse that definitely caught my eye, one that I'm considering in this race. My top pick ultimately landed on number 1, Clear Conscience, at 4-1 for Lisa Lewis. Horse ran really well last time out at this level during Belmont at the Big A, and finished second, showed the ability to make up a little bit of ground while running behind, a little bit more honest fractions for considering New York turf racing. I mean, they went 47-2 to the half, which is, I mean, might as well have run 40 sub 44 because up here we just don't get that sort of pace very often. So definitely had a little something to run into, but has shown some tactical speed in the past to be able to sit at kind of third or fourth position. I'm just thinking maybe with the lack of pace in this race, maybe this one gets the pocket trip on the inside with Javier Castellano up on the mount. And then my value play is number 7, Topic Changer for Mike Maker. And this is kind of I think kind of an interesting horse who started out as kind of your traditional racehorse and then went and was a hurdler for the better part of a year and a half or so, or better part of a year for Kerry Bryan, who's a very respected trainer, both on the flat and jumping as well. And so this was a jumper for a little while, actually won a jump stakes race and won a couple of jump races. So it was kind of interesting. And then comes back to Maker and runs back on the flats again. And I'll be honest, hadn't run in quite a while, over a year. And I thought ran a pretty decent race last time out, making up some ground late in that same race as Clear Conscience was in. Second back from a long layoff, Mike Maker long on the turf. Something that I will always kind of gravitate toward, generally at a little bit of a price of 10-1. So, of course, I'm definitely interested. One that's kind of has had an interesting story and might be able to kind of hit the board into some of your deeper vertical exotics. Well, let's close things out here in race number 12. And this one is a $90,000 maiden special weight for 3-year-old New York bred fillies and mares going a mile on that inner turf. And I ultimately landed on what is a coupled entry, though the other half of the coupled entry is unlikely to run as it is a main track only entry, obviously. And you're only going to be getting that number 1, who is Miss City Girl, 9-2 for Christophe Clement, a trusted trainer on the turf up here. This one had a pretty significant layoff after making a debut in November at Aqueduct, comes back in June. I thought ran a really good race coming from well off the pace and just missed out, getting Lasix now for the second time. Gets the blinkers put on, which might help this one either A, show a little bit more speed, or B, just maybe help focus this one down the stretch a little bit, because it felt like maybe this one hung a little bit in that last race. So at 9-2, I thought presented a little bit of value. Always like the equipment change in that type of a spot. You went to a horse I was taking a real close look at, though, number four Summer Whirl at 5-2.
Yeah, just a quick comment on your horse for people that do use TimeFormUS. We have Miss City Girl running only a 79 speed figure, and it has a little notation that we thought about breaking it out but didn't. And it's a race, if you look in the chart, the horse is running back. It hasn't been anything too eye-catching, not a lot of winners, but all the horses are improving their speed figure. So that's maybe one we want to go back and look at and possibly upgrade. Maybe it should have been broken out. So I wouldn't hold the low speed figure against that one. And just something I recommend to people, if you use TimeFormUS, pop open those charts and take a look, because speed figures are tough these days when they run a lot of turf races and they mix them up, dirt, turf. It can be tough. So it's definitely more art than science. And I think that horse is probably better than her last number reflects. But that said, it would still be a pretty big gap to my top pick, Summer Whirl. She's a horse who's done very little wrong in her 2 starts other than not win. She ran well first time out at 5.5. She seemed to like the mile and a 16th even better at the Belmont at the Big A meet, running a nice 98 speed figure. She comes from off the pace. So I think she would be the most likely winner. But the horse I would be leaning towards betting is the one just to her outside, a horse named Autumn for Carlos Martin. She's a horse that kind of, it's been a theme of a couple of horses we've talked about. She kind of had to take the lead by default last time, drawing the inside post. I don't really think she liked it. She kind of had that target on her back all the way around, ran gamely to the wire, but I've actually liked her efforts in the past better when she is in a more tracking or even closing position. And I think that's the spot she's going to be in here. So I think that she's going to get a good trip. She had speed figures as good or better than Summer Whirl, who's the morning line favorite. So that's one of the things I like to see when I'm betting, when the favorites don't necessarily have the best speed figures and I can find a reason to bet the others.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more about that kind of perception and logic and handicapping angle. My value play in this one went to a horse that it's funny, kind of maybe a little bit of the same as Autumn and a little bit different in that last time out was forced to go kind of as well. And because the horse drew to the far outside, I think was kind of forced to kind of go and try to save as much ground as possible by crossing and clearing. And well, guess what? Drew the outside again. And it's going to be same song, second verse. I find it interesting. I don't know the jockey politics behind all of this and what was offered to different, jockeys in this race or what the logic was. But Flavian Pratt, who is our leading rider up here right now, is off the number 1 Miss City Girl and is staying on the number 10 North End Lady. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see that he, obviously in all likelihood had a choice between these two horses, opted to stay on the 10. And this one, again, has very good speed, breaks from the far outside, is probably going to try to do the same thing it did last time. Last time she nearly managed to pull it off and just kind of faded late and kind of got nabbed late there at the very end. And that was the first start back from a significant layoff. So you'd imagine second time out, the conditioning is going to be a little bit better. Obviously, is going to need to work out a trip from that far outside post. Always a potential concern there, but a little bit of value potentially in the final race. Well, Craig, we got through all 12 races. We did it in just about an hour, which fantastic. Thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate your time. And for folks who may not know, I doubt there's nobody who knows you, but for folks who may not know you, let them know where you can find them on X and social media and kind of what you're doing these days.
Really, it's up there. I'm on Twitter or X as at Craig Milkowski, just my name. I am still making the figures for TimeFormUS, but I've taken a different venture as my new job. So I'll be doing a lot less pace casting, or podcasting, but I'm still talking about the horses. I'm still handicapping the races every day, particularly for the bigger races like Saratoga, Del Mar, all the big stakes races. And I'm still making speed figures for even in places like Belterra Park. No knock on Belterra Park, but I scan the whole scope from the lowest rate, the lowest tracks, lowest handle, lowest speed figure tracks, all the way up to Saratoga. So looking forward to keep doing that and happy to talk about these races anytime. And I'll be active on X as well.
Great. Well, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in to watching this episode of Capping the Card. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the new NYRA Bets YouTube channel. And also, while you're here, make sure to check out all of the other great content we have for this weekend, including my discussion with Gino Piccola over the Del Mar Saturday Stakes races. Got some pretty good races out there as well, in addition to the races up here at Saratoga. Well, until next time, friends, for Craig Milkowski, my name is Matthew DeSantis. Wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you it's now post time.